into another dimension, a dimension of understanding. You are entering a place where reality collides with truth. There are no limits. There are no boundaries. This is Off Planet Radio.
Welcome to Off Planet Radio Live. I'm Randy Moggins. It is Wednesday, February the 13th, 2013. Double 13s. That's kind of interesting. We have a really good show lined up tonight. I'm excited about this because I've wanted to get these guys on for quite a while now. I actually interviewed Matt Presti, I guess maybe about a little over a year ago. And what we're going to talk about tonight is important. As I said last week, we're in a time of really delicate balance in terms of awakening. We've gone through what I consider to be some major shifts in consciousness. I think some people are waking up. But our science is messed up. Our spirituality is messed up. We are navigating with really a lot of bad data. And the work that these guys do is an attempt to correct the record on history, on science, on cosmology, on spirituality, on free energy, which are all things that are part of the focus of this current awakening that we're going through. And it started out as an interesting week. The resignation of Pope Benedict is not without some precedent. First Pope in 600 years to step down voluntarily, and it does make you kind of go, But I think we're going to see the pillars of power shaking a bit more this year, along with some of the things that are coming as well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time screeding tonight. I'll just say right now, the voice is sometimes a tell. I am suffering the ravages of what I'll just call flu-like symptoms. So I may occasionally have to just mute myself for a minute and cough or something like that. But other than that, the energy's good, and I welcome you all. I welcome you on Off Planet Radio 1, and those of you listening on wolfspiritradio.com on the chats. And with that, I want to bring up my guests, Matt Presti and Robert Otey. Welcome to Off Planet Radio, guys.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hey, don't all speak at once.
Nice to join you.
It's good to have you both on. Like I said, I've wanted to do this for a while. Your material is absorbing. It's extensive, and you've done a lot of work in basically, I think, bringing Walter Russell, and not just Walter, but also his wife Lao Russell's material to an audience that otherwise would have missed it. I was reminded of reading through the book today, The Secret of Light, and in the back jacket it mentions about the fact that Tesla basically told Walter Russell to just bury his work for 1,000 years and wait to see if mankind is ready. I guess the question for us now is mankind ready for Walter Russell's work? Are we ready to go the next level?
I think we are.
Yeah.
I think we are. Robert, tell him about the Hunab coup in relation to the 1,000 years.
Yeah, well, I just think the internet has done so much to spread information so rapidly. You know, I mean, Tesla would have had his own version, of course, 100 years ago, but he probably didn't plan, that it would happen like this, and it would actually emerge from the suppression that he experienced. So, I think humanity, definitely a certain part of humanity is definitely ready right now.
And Russell himself kind of pointed out that the evolution of consciousness was not this great massive awakening at once, but was in fact, I guess, sort of like a wave that as we went through our cycles, and I know you're going to talk more about that, different heads began to pop up, so to speak.
Yeah, indeed.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So,
go ahead, Matt.
It's always interesting when you have two guests on, and you guys probably...
And you can't see each other.
Right. You can't see each other, so you have no gestures, you have no visual cues.
Right.
So it's okay. We do this a lot, and it's difficult. I guess what I'm saying is, a lot of people have been feeling that there is a change. And like you said, the Internet has really made a lot of this possible. It's really unprecedented, the amount of alternative, and I use that term advisedly, alternative information that's been able to now leak out. It's given us a way to disseminate information that we didn't have. I mean, Walter Russell's books have been in print since the turn of the 20th century. And really, because of our educational system, we were not taught Walter Russell. We didn't learn about him. I think he was pretty much a fringe element for a lot of years. And for me, until actually I found you and Matt's work, Robert, I had not really gone into Walter Russell's work much at all. Tell me, each one of you, how you got involved with this work, and then how you got involved with each other. Matt, you want to go first?
Sure thing. Yeah, Randy, once we get into the zone, it'll just come as naturally as anything. So as far as how I got into it, I found a used book called The Secret of Light on the bottom shelf at a used bookstore in Salem, Missouri here. And $2 price tag on it, and that at the time I thought it was a Freemasonic book, so I stuck it on the shelf, and it sat there for a couple of years, and eventually revisited my bookshelf, as I do after every book I read, and in 2008 it stuck out to me, and actually late 2007 I began to read it, and the first couple pages in I was glued, and when I finished the book, within a couple months, I took a long time to read it, good 3 to 4 weeks, and then reread it. So I looked at my lovely partner, Lori, and I said, I never need to read another book as long as I live. It had that much of a profound impact on me, and seemed to be exactly all the things I was looking for and wondering about.
Robert, do you want to give us a little bit of your background with Walter and Lao Russell?
Sure. In 1992, I was up doing some mountain climbing at a place called Steens Mountain, which is in the eastern desert of Oregon, southern Oregon. And I was staying at a little place called Crystal Crane Hot Springs, and I met a guy named Gene Davis who was there from McMinnville, Oregon, and he was, the proverbial old holy man. He was like about 83, 84 years old at the time, and due to that friendship, over the next couple years, he had basically taught me the foundations of Russellian science, although he didn't explain to me that it was Walter Russell's work. And it took about another 10 years, I think about 2002 roughly, is when, thanks to the Internet, of course, through the process of studying vortices, studying Viktor Schauberger, studying even something as kind of bizarre and esoteric as the WASPy, I was led directly to Russell's work, which I found the Secret of Light online and read that, and I was like, oh my God, this is the stuff that Gene Davis was teaching me, and he had never told me. So that began my study of Russellian science, and it's grown radically, over the last 10 years, especially the last 2 years, I would say. Since Matt and I have come together, it's been a massive stimulus to dig deeper and deeper and deeper to try to understand these the principles of Russellian science, which are not simple, due to the complexity of the many books that were written and the amendments and everything.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of people, and me notable, we're not science literate. I think that became a field of specialization, which is, I think, one of the ways that knowledge is suppressed as well. So I found it daunting at first to wrap my mind around the concepts of Russell. I think vortex theory for me was easy because it feels like a natural function of the things we see around us. But
absolutely.
Reading The Secret of Light, I actually bought this book as a result of interviewing Matt. And I've had this book for maybe a year. It's got lots of little marks in it and lots of tabs in it. And to be quite honest with you, I will agree that this is profound. This is a holy book. And when I picked it up and began to read it, the concepts in it both blew my mind and resonated at the same time. It's funny because I've been on a spiritual path most of my life, and certainly for the last decade. And a lot of the concepts that Russell was breaking out simply put words to things that I think I already knew. Do each of you have the sense as well that this is actually very natural in terms of understanding it on one level?
Absolutely. I mean, it resonates with nature, first of all. You can look out your window and the very things that are spoken of in these books, you begin to understand, like the rings of trees, the rings of your own bones, the spherical shape of all cellular matter. You know, cells are spheres. Some 50 trillion spheres make up an average human body. So, I mean, the ring and sphere systems, the rings around Saturn, the Milky Way, you know, all these hurricanes, tornadoes, it's all described in the works of Russell, and I think that's what truly resonates with people. It's not, you know, it's hard when you read something about, you know, quantum physics. It just, none of it seems to resonate. I mean, there are portions here and there, but it just does not have that resonant frequency, that ability to transfer it directly into your soul. Lana from Red Ice said it's like he speaks soul to soul as opposed to body computer to body computer, and that's rare in authors. And I think what a lot of people look for in authors is those nuggets, those gems of, you know. I've read multiple books, and the average book I might get one or two gems out of. Those moments where you read a sentence and a light bulb goes off in your head, and you're just like, oh wow, I get it, right? But with Russell, it's like there's a gem on every page. So every page, a light bulb goes off, especially if you have any understanding of nature or nature's processes, or any sort of a personal relationship with nature where you actually take time out in your day to acknowledge her, you know. And I think that's what it does, especially for musicians, being that musicians, you know, we manipulate waves, and Russell describes the universe as being waves. So it's quite clear that it does resonate in the deepest part of your soul, and it becomes sort of a, you know, self-realized as you go along reading.
Yeah, I need to point out that you both are musicians, and we're going to play some of your music on the break tonight too. Since you brought it up, quantum physics, contrast that a little bit with Russellian concepts. I actually was fairly affected by quantum physics simply from the idea of trying to grasp non-locality principle, which was something that I was learning as a result of delving into remote viewing. So I don't find all of those concepts necessarily moot, but at the same time, how would you contrast or correlate what you see in quantum physics with the Russellian universe?
Well, first of all, you know, Russell was opposed to quantum mechanics. He basically spoke out against it, just like he did with the nuclear theory of the atom. You know, the atomic suicide is actually a diatribe against it, and that's, you know, his final work and basically the final distillation, full of all the amendments that he made to his earlier works. But, you know, it doesn't work at all because quantum mechanics is based on materialistic reductionism. So, you know, the materialists want to try to reduce everything to so-called fundamental quantums of energy, as if you know, energy exists in packets and little bundles. Somehow the universe is based on these little packets and bundles of energy, which is really no different than the reductionism that was used by, you know, the 19th century theorists that were trying to reduce everything to ether particles. It's the same kind of mentality, and you can't go there because in Russellian science, where you go to is the still magnetic light at the center point of every spiraling waveform that gives substance or form to an atom, a galaxy, or a sun. That center point is absolute stillness. That stillness is the Creator's magnetic universe of absolute stillness, zero curvature, and cold. So everything, that's the fulcrum that controls the twin opposing vortices that give form to nature. So everything actually goes to there. In quantum mechanics, you have this bizarre belief that nothing can exist smaller than the Planck's length. So there's basically a wall there. You can't go past that smaller so-called length of any kind of particle. Well, that's just not true. You can go all the way to absolute stillness, which is the cause, which is the fulcrum that creates all reality in this electric universe we're living in.
That concept goes really deep, because now we're at the point where we absolutely do have a zero point when you look at it that way. Is that correct? The point of complete stillness.
Well, 0 point's unfortunately a very negative term. It was created by Einstein and people of his ilk, and it really is a derogatory term that's aimed at basically saying there's no such thing as free energy. So we don't use the 0 point. We just say the still magnetic light. In Russellian science, all spherical systems, all ring systems are centered by a point of stillness, right? And that point of stillness is the still magnetic light, the Creator's magnetic universe that controls the electric universe.
Okay, so there is an electric universe, and we are living in the emanations that come from this Creator's. You guys have your own language for this, and I'm not as versed in it, so I may use terms that seem kind of alien to the way you talk about it. I'm trying to translate here in my mind. But okay, if we start from that single point, the absolute creative point, what occurs and how does the universe operate, and what is the state of movement and flux that occurs?
Do you want to take that, Matt?
Sure thing.
Okay.
The 0 point, the reason we don't use it is because, Robert, would you quickly want to just define what in terms of scientific, why we don't use that? I think that's important for people to understand.
I just did. I was saying that it's a derogatory term related to energy. Right.
Explain that, though, briefly, because that's important for people to understand. We're not against terminologies. We're just for terms that make sense in nature.
Absolutely.
Right. So in Russellian science, we say still magnetic lights, or points of stillness. Here's the difference. Think of the magnetic universe as being an infinite number of cathode planes of stillness. They go on forever, right? Mm-hmm. The Creator uses those cathode planes of stillness to produce either cathode planes of cubes, which house and control the spiraling motions of so-called matter, spheres and ring systems, or that's called magnetism. Those planes, those cathode planes, would be called magnetism in Russellian science. In gravity would be called points and shafts. So the center of a spherical system would be the center of gravity, which would be that center point of still magnetic light, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens is that still point is extended into a shaft, which controls the spiraling electric vortices, which give form to a sun or a planet or an atom or a galaxy, right? So the gravity shaft and the point of gravity are both also still magnetic light. They're still magnetic light because they're from the Creator's magnetic universe of stillness. So, gravity and magnetism are basically the same thing. They're two different connotations of the same thing. Like you would have a rocking chair versus a reclining chair or something. They're both chairs, but they're two different aspects of the same thing. But ultimately, the magnetic universe, the Creator's magnetic universe of stillness, zero curvature, and absolute cold, it is what controls the electric universe. It gives form to this electric universe that we find ourselves in, of temporal motions. And that's a very different concept than is taught in academic science.
Okay, so we now have a working model for gravity. I've never been satisfied that traditional or quantum physics could adequately define what gravity is, and I've seen the equations, I've seen the explanations, but nobody really gives us an explanation of what gravity is and from where it emanates.
Well, it's absolute stillness. It controls the spiraling rings, right? Gravity is stillness, and so is magnetism. In Russellian science, there's only one force. It's electricity. There's no positive and negative electricity. There's only electricity. And it either compresses or it expands, one or the other. It either charges or discharges, but it's only one thing. It's electricity.
Okay.
Yeah, Randy, if I may, I'd like to expound on your question from earlier. These still points of magnetic stillness, the Creator's still magnetic light, is omnipresent throughout the universe. In our Unit 16, we inverted pictures of galaxies to show how the white light is omnipresent, the scene from the Matrix where Neo is in the white room and Morpheus says to him, "This is the construct." Well, that white light is omnipresent in and through everything. And what happens, the fundamental difference between Russellian science and the science of sense-based men in the world is that the reductionists believe, the material scientists believe that matter is the cause of mind. But the mystics and Russellian science and mystics around the earth through time immemorial seem to have this view that mind is causal. So if mind is causal, and I would bet my money and my house on it, because the way it works, the desire is the unfolding and the division of the stillness. I mean, when you say a word, you're dividing the stillness. When you lift your arm from sitting still or get up in the morning, that electricity begins to move. Your mind moves through your electric brain, which commands your body, and you break and divide the stillness of rest to begin to move. And all things rest from motion, but all things begin from stillness and then return to it. We could take the grandfather clock example. It takes a mind to wind the crank, to tighten that spring in the grandfather clock, but it takes no electricity to unwind it. It will unwind over a period of a week or more until it returns to stillness. It takes a mind to divide the stillness of a guitar string to make it vibrate, but it takes no energy to make it return to stillness. It takes mind to throw a rock into a pond to create the ripples, but it takes no energy or negative electricity, as science, materialistic science believes, for it to return to stillness. And this is a huge thing that's right in front of the face of science, of material science. It is so simple that they do not see it. All motion is a division of silence and stillness. Stillness. All sound is a division of silence, and all sound and motion return to stillness and silence. That's the way the universe works. You could. There are a billion examples in front of us.
Well, just for instance,
that we could look at.
If you strum a guitar, what happens? The strings vibrate, they set up harmonics, but they ultimately return back to silence at some point when the energy has ceased vibrating those strings.
That is correct. And
Russell said that all motion here in the electric universe is an aberration in stillness. I mean, the one eternal reality is stillness.
And that's the kingdom of heaven within. That man, that's why we can't find it in materialistic science, because they're using sense-based instruments which only detect motion. And they're using that to try to find the source of energy. And Russell said as long as man looks into matter itself to find the source of energy, he will never find it. But when he understands that stillness or the fulcrum is where all the energy is, his science will leap ahead 1,000 years in that day. So, I mean, we could go on with example after example. I mean, we should write actually a book about all the examples of dividing the stillness. I mean, every time we speak a word, we divide the stillness.
Well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. That's really, I think, what the scriptures were trying to tell us, that there was a vibration. Is that correct?
That's correct, a division in the stillness. So, but it was not a big bang.
Yeah, I'd just like to qualify real quick, though. Frank Chester did use empirical science to discover the stillness. Are you familiar with Frank Chester's work, Randy?
Somewhat. I've seen the name, but I can't say familiar. So go ahead.
Yeah, through just digging in the trenches for 10 years of just absolute empirical research, just hands-on trial and effort, building models. He was a sculptor and a painter. He's in his 70s now. He taught, college and painting and sculpting and stuff, and just a brilliant man. What he was able to deduce after 10 years of study was that the heart has twin opposing vortices which control it. All of nature is based on twin opposing vortices, from atoms to galaxies to suns to planets. Everything's based on the same formula. At the heart of all these things is that stillness. At the center of our own hearts is that still magnetic light, that point where the seat of our soul is, that gives the energy to run our entire bodies. That's where our consciousness is, in our hearts. So, basically, Frank Chester was able to prove it empirically when he was able to produce the chestahedron, which is kind of a modified platonic solid that has kite faces and triangles. But he's an amazing man, and his work basically validates and confirms exactly what Russell taught. And what he's doing is he's revealing the magnetic space geometries that give form to the human heart.
Where did modern science go wrong? How is it that we wound up in the era of what was called the atom, the nuclear age? We had atomic energy, which was promised to be this great liberator, and we had the horrors of the nuclear holocaust that occurred as a result of World War II. Where in all of that did Walter Russell play a part? Because I know he had a role in this somewhere.
You want to take that back?
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. So, basically what happened is, science has been sabotaged. Walter Russell was one of the greatest luminaries who's ever walked the face of this earth, and he was known by kings and queens and presidents and all the big, elite business leaders of his time, and he's been erased from history. The reason being that in 1892, Tesla had already created free energy, right, with his experiments in Colorado Springs.
Right.
So the elite knew what the real science was, and they made sure that we didn't get it. Instead, they promoted, Rutherford Bohr, the fake, idiotic, nuclear theory of the atom with these little balls, like neutrons and protons, and then electrons whirling around in all directions. I mean, just absolute insanity. Something that my professors told me in 1976 in my first chem class was it was a fraud. And here it is 37 years later, and they're still teaching the same garbage. So you have to understand, the science it's not by any accident. This is totally mind control. The science we've been taught is absolute garbage. And that's why things like quantum mechanics and string theory get promoted and all this sci-fi weirdness, because it leads to nowhere. They don't want us to have free energy. That's the bottom line.
Well, and a good example of that is the Hadron Collider at CERN. I knew I was.
Yeah, we endearingly call it the Large Hadron Collider. I mean, it's really just a perpetual masturbation game these guys play. That Nobel Prizes all around. Again, they're looking for the cause of motion in motion itself. There's a comment in the chat room says using materialism to define materialism has always been a logical fallacy, and I absolutely agree. I mean, you can't get any better than that. It's as Russell said, you might as well cast nets into the ocean to search for oxygen. It's
right.
They're playing a shell game with us, and as long as we're always focused on the effects, we will never understand the cause. And so that's imperative to understand what Russell was teaching. For one, the main reason science went astray, in my personal opinion as well, and it's probably Robert's too, but is they removed the creator from creation.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's number one. And so it's like removing the painter from the painting and saying, oh, the painting painted itself, and now we have to analyze the paint to figure out how. Or this symphony wrote itself, and so we must analyze the notes on the paper to figure out how. Or the building built itself, or the bridge, or the city, and we must analyze the concrete and the sidewalks to figure out how did this happen. Instead of just understanding that mind is causal, you can't so much as scratch your nose without thinking about it. The brain is nothing more than an electrical recorder of sensed vibration. The mind works through the brain, which creates the electricity, and yet we shouldn't think of the brain as having intelligence. The brain is simply like a hard drive. It records things.
Right.
We have file after file after file of memories and sense-based acquisition of empirical reductionist mindsets and things like that. But using your brain to try to figure out the universe is like using a DVD to try to figure out who made the movie. There's electrical activity in a DVD player, but we don't say that the DVD player has knowledge any more than we should think that a human brain has knowledge because there's electric waves moving through it. See, when you rest at night, the waves cease. When you're in a deep sleep, and I don't mean REM, rapid eye movement, is electrical vibration of dreaming. I mean when you don't dream, you're really truly at rest. And that's where bodies go. All bodies follow this pattern of resting from action and then repeating the action the next day to rest from it again for a cycle of so many years. Planets have a billion-year cycle. Human bodies have approximately an 80-year cycle. Galaxies could have trillions of year cycle. These long cycles are beyond our sense range, and these short ones are definitely beyond. There's some particles that only last, these vorticular spins that only last a few seconds or less, tenths of a second. But until we learn to look at the universe using our minds, we will always be fooled by the illusions of our senses.
So what is the mind? I understand the distinction between the mind and the brain, but what is the mind, what is source of mind, and how is it connected to, well, I just put it there, the source. In other words,
mind is spirit.
Okay.
Mind is our soul, our consciousness, not our thinking. Our thinking is full of sensory-based deceptions. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like to just say, the result of this, removing the creator from creation, is that we've got this godless, atheistic, agnostic science that churns out legions of, people that are brainwashed into this stuff, many of who have no conscience whatsoever. So they don't mind building weapons of mass destruction. They don't mind destroying the environment. They don't mind creating chemical concoctions that kill us and vaccines and all this other garbage because they've been brainwashed into a false science.
This is actually the heart of the psychopathic mind that dominates this planet right now, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we have a term for that. We call them body dwellers. They live outwardly toward their senses, where genius men and women live inwardly toward their souls.
Yeah.
And that's the major difference. That's what the politician does. They're all about the cameras and the lights and the hookers and the underage prostitutes in the Dominican Republic, if you've heard about that.
Yeah.
But it's just when you become so disconnected from your soul and you deny the spirit, that's why the red man could look at the white man and just ask, what is wrong with him? Why do they have this yellow fever? They come here, kill our women and children, and then dig up this rock and look at it while they salivate. We don't understand that. It's rampant materialism, and we're seeing it come to an end because it's finally nature is beginning to balance this imbalance, it takes a few generations, but inevitably, to the degree that man breaks the law of balance, which is the only law in the universe, is to the degree that he will be broken by it. And any man can attempt to try to break the balance, stand on the edge of a cliff and jump off and break the balance of your 2 feet on the ground and see what happens to you. It's irrevocable, inexorable law that when you break the balance of nature, nature will right it to the degree that you broke it. And so we're seeing a reaction against government, a reaction against authority, a reaction against crooked politicians in the form of people taking a stand. And that's the nature's balance. That's the natural nature reaction to an imbalance of greed, avarice, and despicability towards your fellow men. And it will be righted. So it's just a matter of time.
There's a question in the chat room. I thought it was interesting. It says, does it take sentience to comprehend true silence? I guess we'd have to define sentience, right?
That would be a good start.
Is that the same as consciousness? Is that the same as mind? Is that the soul working through the mind itself?
Well, sentience is defined as awareness, a state of elementary or undifferentiated consciousness. So the Russells were implicit that all in the universe, the only reality is the consciousness of the Creator. And each one of us is our own point, our own soul of the universal soul. We are extended from the stillness into a body. And that when we meditate, what we're doing is losing the sense of our body, turning off the senses and going into the mind itself, which is the kingdom of heaven within, which is where all the greatest men and women have brought out the ideas that shape the culture and the generations of people to come. It's where all the great inventions like Nikola Tesla had the great flash, and he saw the AC motor in this flash while walking through the park. I mean, this flash is I've experienced the flash where I'll go and write a song almost immediately. Having this flash, I'll know exactly what I'm going to write. So from my own experience, I know this flash is real, and all the great men I've ever read and studied, even Edison to a degree, it's had these flashes. These flashes, there are about 41 people in history who have ever had a full severance from body, called a full illumination, or a full divine illumination. And these people start world religions. They don't mean to, but the followers of them are so impressed that they feel the need to worship them beyond even what their own message was. And of course, after a couple hundred years, the message usually gets all screwed up, and then people start fighting over it. So if people would just find the stillness in themselves and understand that all people everywhere all have one thing in common. We all extend from the stillness and return to it every day. Every breath we take, in between the breath, and there's that still zero point, that stillness between the breath, and when you breathe out, you reach the end, and it returns to zero, and then it starts over. I mean, the universe is cyclical, but the motion is not the reality. The reality is the stillness upon which it moves, and that's the saying, be still and know that I am God. And I think when we begin to do this, we'll understand, and just look out at nature. Anything in nature, anything in man's world, all pretty much its natural state is rest. Your car is at rest until you turn it on with your mind, turn the key with your hand, send the electric signal from the key to the ignition, which fires up the car, and then you divide the stillness to drive your car to town. You turn it off, it's still again. You go into the store, you buy your stuff, you come out, and same thing. It's in and through everything. Stillness is the prime condition of the entire universe. Anything that is in motion is divided from the stillness, but must ultimately return to a state of rest.
I was just kind of looking over the chat a little bit here, but I guess first off, we've made distinctions between science and philosophy and spirituality. It was Descartes who basically created the split, the idea that somehow man was of two consciousnesses and that these were completely split. Is that the beginning of this, or is this just an ancient disease of humanity as a result of maybe even what you would kind of call the fall?
Go ahead, Robert.
You're the philosopher. Go ahead, take that one.
Could you please repeat the question?
Okay, Descartes sort of mapped this thing out of the mind-body split, which I mark as the beginning of this modern division in materialism. In other words, our minds and our bodies were viewed as two separately functioning units. And then you have materialism, which treats everything mechanically. But we have this disconnect. In other words, we as human beings don't view ourselves as an integrated unit. We view ourselves what I would call almost schizophrenically. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, the belief that we are our bodies alone is that sort of, it's the pagan barbaric mentality that we believe we are our bodies. We see bodies come and go, but we do not understand yet what death is. What Walter and Lao understood is that there was no death in the entire universe of mighty suns and stars. What there is a rest from action. So the life that you live is recorded within the stillness of your own soul unit, and then you pick up where you leave off when you unfold into a new body. And it takes generations, thousands and thousands of years for consciousness to grow. Just like a plant, only consciousness's life cycle is much greater than a plant. You can watch a plant grow in a matter of a week from seed to beginning to bud, but you can't watch consciousness grow unless you had about a 5,000 or 6,000 year lifespan. Then you could look back on consciousness and go, yeah, 6,000 years ago we were pretty living in the body dwelling to the core. And only recently, in the past few hundred years, has man begun to express more of a mindful existence. I mean, we did not have symphony music before the early 1500s, I think, or so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're seeing, what Walter was fond of was that consciousness progresses in stages. So as layer upon layer of a ring of a tree will grow around from the seed of consciousness for humanity began with the first cave paintings. So I mean, whatever started the spark of man is still debatable. They never went into the actual beginnings of man, but man, like anything else, is the seed of an idea of the Creator's mind. And the one thing that all creation has the one thing that all creation has in common is that it stems from a seed and returns to it. The problem is we believe ourselves to be the bodies, but there's those few who come and they give us a demonstration of what it is to have a mind existence. And that mind existence is what lifts man's civilization one step higher. Every great genius is the giver of man's culture and society. But as we're seeing, someone wrote, no wonder they keep us busy, fooled by the illusions of our senses with all this noise and there's everywhere you look, the Palm Pilots, the cell phones, the bells and whistles, everything's always making noise or dividing the silence or dividing the stillness. So we're just pulled out of that ability to stop and be still and really feel what the mind is able to know. And so, until we learn to basically live toward, to look toward our souls with our inner eyes and inner ears, to look inward as opposed to looking outward, then we'll always be a slave to our body. And Walter and Lao said that, people do one of two things. They're either slaves to matter or they learn to master it. So you're either a slave to your body or you command your body in a masterly way. So Russell was one of the few in the world that was able to command and demonstrate not only what he wrote, but demonstrate through action this very philosophy, that is the living philosophy that encompasses the Russellian doctrines. So,
did Walter and Lao Russell, did they have practices, meditative practices, or things that they espoused as part of their work? Was there a particular thing that they advocated as a way to get to this state? I mean, any of us that have studied Eastern philosophy or any of the disciplines where you do go into a quiet state know, and you talked about it earlier as well with the breath, the idea of the inhalation, exhalation, and the pause between the breaths. Did they go into that in any of their work?
Yeah, they did. They advocated that people should definitely practice meditation. I mean, if you can't still your brain and your electric body, then you'll never be able to penetrate the veil or these pillars of motion. I mean, your left and right brain are the red and blue hemispheres, which are the motion generators. I mean, so until you go into the equator of yourself, which is the dividing line that goes straight down the center of your left and right half of your body, that is the kingdom of heaven within. And the only way to go beyond the two pillars and enter that white light is to become still and to become silent. And so it's very important that you have to practice meditation. And, you can't think your way into experiencing stillness, because there is no thought in stillness. There is no division in stillness. There is no vibration in stillness. So do not try to increase your vibrations. Try to lower them. And breathing is one of the things that you can focus on. And the heart, the heart.
Stillness. That's where the seat of the soul is. That stillness is there. You go into your heart. Your heart knows all.
Yeah, you always say I know with my heart, but you never hear people say I think with my heart, but you know with your heart. So yeah, it's these little confirmations.
That's real interesting. A few years ago, as a result of some studies I was doing on another radio show, I found some research that indicated that the heart itself actually had brain tissue in it, that in fact the idea that the heart and the brain are separate. Maybe this is where I was going with Descartes as well. This split between the heart and the brain, but in fact the brain tissue in the heart itself is actually a tiny brain itself. And so
that's where the knowing comes from, and it communicates to the thinking mind, which is in the brain. The heart knows, the brain thinks.
Yeah, and when the visionary experience occurs, that ability to see through the veil, the pineal gland being directly connected to the heart, that is the centermost organ of the body, and the heart is the centermost organ of the body. In both ways, those two in unison, I think you have the visionary experience, and you're able to see with the mind, but know with the heart. So you experience the completeness of these two different hemispheres, if you will.
Yeah, the pineal gland's the mind's eye. It's like the projector. If you go into shamanic trance, you can see through the pineal gland the geometries that compose all the universe. They're visible in your mind's eye.
In talking about this illumination, because most people are of the mind that most of their lives they're not going to be illuminated. And I understand that we're dealing in cycles of individual lifetimes, which is complex within itself. But the idea of enlightenment on the level that we're talking about with Walter Russell, especially the writings found in the Divine Iliad, is that something we aspire to? Is that something that we can absolutely attain? And was that part of what he was trying to bring out? I guess a lot of people last year talked about the shift in consciousness, which I believe Crystal Clark and I had talked about this on a show we did a few weeks ago, that we felt that, there was an uptick. It's not a grand awakening of all humanity, but essentially, if you would think of humanity and 3% of them were beginning to wake up, there's a vibrational aspect to that. Do you agree with that? And do you also agree that it's possible for a person to have an awakening in a grand sense in their own lifetime?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, basically what Walter did was him and Lao taught man how to become a masterly person. I mean, you look at his life, he was a master sculptor, a master architect, a master musician, a master painter, a master philosopher, a master horseman, master figure skater, master writer, master scientist, master teacher, master geometrician. He had 11 conferred degrees given to him, all with a 6th grade education. And a lot of people will go, well, you filter everything through Walter and Lao Russell. When are you going to look at other stuff? Well, I'll tell you what. When you can show me a guy who's done more in one lifetime than Walter Russell has, I'll gladly take a look at him. But until that point comes, until somebody can say, hey, Matt, here's this guy that did, 10 more things than Russell did, I'll gladly take a look. But until that point comes, I'm gonna look to the guy who demonstrated and walked his talk more than any man on this planet that I've ever encountered. And that's one reason I just adore this couple, because in my eyes, demonstrating and walking your talk is a lot more impressive than talking talk and never demonstrating it. And there's a lot of people who do that in this world, especially on the speaking circuits and the quantums and the scientists and the standing around in a white coat smashing particles together going, we're so great, look at us, give us all Nobel Prizes for our efforts. That's not demonstrating anything to me, except that you can confuse yourself with motion. So, but
Carl Sagan and Hawkins and did any of these people even compare?
Yeah, and Einstein in particular. The one thing he actually created was a concrete refrigerator that didn't run on electricity. And I mean, if that idea would have caught on, every time we moved, Einstein would be a curse word, because we'd all have broken backs doing a concrete refrigerator around. Thank God that idea didn't catch on. But, self-promoted, these guys are promoted as genius, where genius to me is the power to demonstrate. You got to walk your talk. You can't just sit in an armchair and go, here's a theory, and then everybody buys it, but then you're considered the greatest genius of the 20th century. He was nothing compared to Walter Russell, not even a fly on the back of an elephant in comparison to Walter Russell. And as far as 2012 goes, I've never thought of 2012 as being the great year that's going to change everything. I've always felt it was like the peak of like a cycle, a peak point, because I do look out at the world and I do see everything seems to be compressing and expanding exponentially. I mean, our technology is getting smaller and smaller. We're moving into the nano world. We're becoming extremely much more spiritual as a race of humans than we ever have before. We're beginning to discover all the fallacies with the Deluminati and even the minute, Beyonce came on Super Bowl, 1,000 people put videos out that it's a satanic ritual. It's harder to pull the wool over people's eyes. There is a grand awakening taking place, and it is not done yet. This is just the beginning that we're seeing here. So there's a lot to go yet, but I think when we all understand that we're in this process together, and that it's basically people who understand their connection to spirit and then those who deny it. There are a large group of people a small group, I'd say, of people ascending and an extremely large group of people descending.
Explain that. What do you mean by descending?
Well, just living outwardly toward the senses. Okay. All they care about is acquiring acquiring materialistic things. I call it materialistic externalism. But there are slightly ever more people that are looking inward toward the soul to acquire the light of mind. And are becoming a master of their body instead of a slave to it.
And let me ask you this, because my theory has been for a long time that consciousness elevation doesn't require the mass of humanity, that it pivots off of the small percentage who are ascending, that smaller group actually turn the entire ship. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Well, unfortunately, in this society, the body dweller is in control right now. I feel that, the energy barons, as Robert says, the central bankers and the warmongers are really driving the policies that are, turning humanity, and we're seeing bloodbaths, and we're seeing, increase in drones, and we just saw this guy burned alive yesterday in a cabin before they even identified him. So, unfortunately, the media and all these control mechanisms seem to have the power to steer, but I think what I like in steering yourself is like, I made the choice several years ago. I refer to the powers that were as the Titanic, and I like to liken myself to being on a lifeboat. Robert and I both are viewing the world from a lifeboat as opposed to being on the Titanic, so we have this ability to step aside from the falsities and to try to really see the world as it is. But we do understand that there are still a lot of people on this Titanic, and they're being led to their own destruction, to their own slaughter. And so you can't help but try to help these people and try to throw nuggets of information and knowledge to because some of these people are in our own families. My own mother, she just doesn't get half of what we say, but she's tried to watch some of our stuff, but she just doesn't understand. And I think it's a generational thing. Consciousness progresses in stages, but I think you can progress your consciousness through intentionality by taking part in the process.
So do we live in parallel with this world? Do we separate? Do we find ways to deal with what I'll just call, for the sake of convenience here, our own reality, which is the creator reality, as opposed to what I'll call the parasitic reality of the masses? How do we navigate that?
Well, I think there are those who try to create their own reality, and those are the artists, and the artists really, you notice that will fund wars and warmongers and, guys who have an invention of how to kill billions of people with a bomb will get all the money. But a person who wants, an endowment for art is out of luck. We don't fund our artists. We don't fund our geniuses. We fund those who help, perpetuate the imbalance of the one percenters. So I think that the greatest joy a person can get out of life is living a creative life from mind. And the least joy a person can get out of life is doing what you're told by the authorities and just, sitting on your couch and hoping that trouble never comes to your living room. So, there are those who take an active role in life and those who watch it go by and just would rather be left alone. And, there are two kinds of people in this world, in a sense, the doers and those who, there's those who create ideas, and then there's those who enjoy the ideas created by others and have none of their own. So, this is a battle of ideas, really, in my mind, that the more we can be creator-like, like our creator, and manifest our creator, which is an artist, the more we can bring into existence a balanced state of being within ourselves and extend that balance to people around us and then eventually to the rest of the world. But it's an active participatory process. It's not something you can sit on the sidelines and watch go by. You have to take part. If you want to see change in the world, you have to be the change you seek, as Gandhi said.
Yeah. Absolutely. Robert, I wanted to get some of your feedback on this as well. You seem to, just based on what I've seen of your biography online, you kind of lead an alternative life. Is that correct? You're sort of an outdoorsman.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a foreman on a horse ranch.
And see, that connection to me kind of plays into this as well. People who are more attached to the earth, people who have a sense of the magnificence of creation. We live in these square boxes. I'm going tangential here. We live in these square boxes. We live in structures and cubicles that are really not very conducive to creative energy. But when you get outside, when you are able to contact in nature, it's like the energies begin to rise up. Do you have a thought on that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what Russell's work was all about. It was inspired by being in nature. And I've spent a great deal of my life in nature and, kind of alternative settings up in Mendocino and places like that. This is an awesome farm. A ranch I'm living on right now. It's about 26 acres, and there's a stream flowing through it, and a dozen horses, and walnut orchards and fruit orchards and big pastures, and gorgeous mountains around me. So I'm totally immersed in it. So I feel that that's the best way to connect with the Creator, is to be out there walking in nature. Take early morning walks, and you go into that silence within, and that's where all the creativity seems to flow from.
Yeah, I know my greatest inspiration comes when I'm either in the forest or a desert somewhere where the symmetry in nature starts to pop out. That's where I tend to connect with it. Before we close out this hour, I want you guys to let people know where they can find you. And you are both collective and individual efforts, and also you've got some conferences coming up, and you're also doing online seminars as well. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we recently joined the School of the Holy Science, compliments of Ruth Smith, Santos Bonacci, and we're going to be presenting on March 4th a webinar called The Creator's Still White Magnetic Light, which we're going to do a PowerPoint, Robert and I together, and define God and the process of creation using Russellian science and the terminology contained therein. And we're also planning a conference for September 7th and 8th, 2013, in joint unison with the Center of the One Heart organization from Virginia, which is the students of the University of Science and Philosophy that have carried on the annual gatherings that Walter and Lao would have. So it's an exciting time. I think it's going to be great to get the message out there and really begin to bring people together on the holy science, as it's called. So really understanding what we live in and knowing how everything is light. We must know how light works, and it's important for us so that we can see where we're going. And as a race, I think it's about time.
And maybe we can talk about that a little bit more in the next segment, go into a little bit more about light and how things function and the scientific and spiritual aspects of that. Your website is thesecretoflight.com, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you have a ton of videos and actual courses online that people can take to understand this. And I need to do this. I need to go through the course. But there's just tons of material here, bunches of videos and links that people can go in and begin to acquaint themselves with the work of Walter and Lao Russell. And I have to say that this work is something that anybody that's really interested in going to the next level needs to tap into. So we'll take a break at this point. We'll come back on the other side with my guests, Matt Presti and Robert Otey. We're talking about Walter and Lao Russell, and we will be right back. back to the second hour of Off Planet Radio Live for February 13th, 2013. I guess it's the eve of Eros. Tomorrow is Valentine's Day for the romantically inclined. And got some comments on the chat line about strange voices and noises. Somebody even said it sounds like birds on the stream. So I was trying to check that out. I'm actually monitoring the stream as it goes out at source, and I'm not hearing it, so that's really strange. Some of you said you've also heard it on audio files. I'll follow up on that. We have a Frankensteinian studio thing going on here, so it's always possible. Maybe some other people can let me know as well if you hear that. The fact that we stream at all sometimes is a miracle. It's taken me a year to master to the degree that I have. The technology that I have here, we burn through computers and software and servers, and Dave and I have gone through all sorts of angst over this, but I'm actually hearing that. Okay. There is definitely a sound in the background. It may be my mic. Next week we move to a new studio. So the good news is next week, whatever that noise is, and it could even be our heating system, that might be what you're hearing as well. But there's definitely a sound there. Wow. That's freaky. Hey guys, welcome back to the second half of Off Planet Radio. The Off Planet effect is in the background tonight. Welcome back, Matt and Robert.
Good to be here.
So in this part of the show, I thought we'd maybe kind of go into some of the science aspects of it a little bit. Maybe what we can do, and Robert can kind of lead this a little bit, is give us maybe a 101 form of a rundown on Russellian science, electricity, magnetism, and some of the, simplified science aspects of what Walter and Lao Russell introduced us to.
Okay. Yeah. The Creator's magnetic light universe of still magnetic white light is the true light in Russellian science. What we call light here is an electrical simulation of light. So magnetism is, as we were talking earlier, is cathode planes of stillness. In Russellian science, we have what are known as cubes, magnetic cubes, that control the spiraling electric motions which give form to matter, to substance, to atoms, galaxies, suns. So the electricity is the only force in the universe. Magnetism is stillness. The electricity is controlled by stillness also, which as we described earlier, was gravity, which centers systems, whether ring systems like a galaxy or a solar system or a Earth or a spherical body. There's a point of stillness which is extended into a shaft, and that shaft is still magnetic light also. And it controls the spiraling motions of electricity around it, which give form to it. So we have a very different kind of language and terminology that we use, and it often confuses people that come from academic backgrounds because they hear these terms and they completely misinterpret them according to the false academic definitions that they've been taught. So this is one of the foundational problems in teaching Russellian science, is that often we're using the same exact terms. In fact, last night I guess there was a interview with Santos and Jason Berbelli where they were discussing some of the terminology used in The Secret of the Light. And what Walter Russell does is often he will use a double entendre. So he'll use academic terms like, for instance, electron and proton and neutron. He didn't believe in a nuclear atom at all. In fact, as I was saying earlier, atomic suicide is a diatribe against the nuclear atom. It's a complete derision of it, as it were. So what he was meaning, like in the interview that we'd heard with Santos and Jason, they were talking about, particles, so-called particles, and whether they were either charging, which would be so-called proton, or discharging, which would be a so-called electron, or whether they were totally balanced at a wave field amplitude, which would be a neutron. Now, you have to understand that, Russell used terms like that, but he didn't believe these things. I mean, he used terms like black holes also, but he had a very different definition of a black hole. A black hole in Russellian science is a hole within a two-dimensional plane, which is radically different than a three-dimensional spherical compressed mass, according to the academic definition, where a sun collapses and becomes extremely small, and it's a three-dimensional sphere, which no light can escape from. So that's just a kind of a warning for anybody that's interested in studying this, is that often, Russell would use these terms in his science, but use it in almost a mockery, in a double entendre, in order to qualify it as something else.
Yeah, and Randy, if I might just add in there, I mean, it's real important for people to understand that if you don't read Atomic Suicide, I mean, in trying to understand Walter Russell without reading Atomic Suicide is like trying to understand the Bible having only read the Old Testament. I mean, really, it's the cream distillation, the most advanced understanding. They completely deride negative electricity as non-existent. And that's what we were talking about earlier. It does not take any electricity for things to return to stillness. And that's, the idea that there's more than one force is, again, an illusion of the senses. The only force there is the compressive force, and the compression expands, so that those two states are the same force doing seemingly two different things. But it only takes electricity to compress, but not to return to stillness. So
electricity actually charges and discharges. It's not two forms of the same thing. It's actually just electricity. And unfortunately, science has qualified it as, positive and negative electricity. And Walter Russell had used those terms in his earlier books, like the universal one, even up to the point, I guess, of, a new concept of the universe. But those were later amended with the help of his wife, Leo, who brought, as we were talking about, the feminine balance. That gave him the perception that he was able to give a clearer message of his work.
Exactly, and she actually got her knowledge of there being no negative electricity from her own illumination. She was walking around the mountain, and the idea came into her head, and they talked it over, and they decided together that indeed there wasn't any kind of negative electricity which pulls the positive toward it in an effort to extinguish it. So that idea, I mean, and again, we can look at anything in nature, and there is no force that requires anything to return to stillness. Things return to stillness without the help or aid of any negative force whatsoever. It's empirically demonstratable in anything you look at. A grandfather clock is just an excellent example. It takes electricity of the human mind to wind up that spring, but it does not take a negative force for it to discharge. It does that automatically. So, and anything is like that. That's why all human bodies, it takes electricity for you to compress the air into your lungs, but it does not take any electricity for you to exhale. And that's why when any human body in this world dies, what happens is we breathe out. That's the last thing we do when we die for the physical body.
Well, discharge is electrical also, actually. I mean, they're both electrical.
It doesn't
charge and discharge.
It doesn't take a force for discharge.
Well, there's only one force. There's only one force. It's electricity. It either charges or discharges. So it's both. It is a force, but it's discharging. You see what I'm saying? I don't think I've made that clear to you, I guess, because there's not a negative electricity. It is electricity, but it's discharging electricity. So it's not negative.
But it doesn't take a separate negative force for discharge to happen.
That's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm saying too.
Yeah,
I'm saying the same thing. Only that when you breathe out, that doesn't require an opposite or negative electric force to...
Exactly. It's electric itself.
Right.
So we're not talking, strictly speaking, about polarity of electricity. We're talking about states. Is that correct?
Right. Whether it's charging or discharging, it's all just one thing. Just electricity.
Yeah, what we're getting, by the way, on the sound is an echo within Skype itself, because I've been listening for a few minutes, and somewhere there's a feedback loop within Skype. So sorry about that, guys. I know that's a little disturbing, but we'll work on that.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to interrupt your flow there, but I needed to understand that concept, because that's the way I was visualizing it, that in fact you're simply returning back to a state of rest at that point.
Right. Just think of it. All motion is electrical, whether it's either charging or discharging. It's not two different forces. It's one force.
Right. But that's not the way we're taught things.
Exactly. And it's not even the way that Russell described it in his earlier works, like in Universal One. You'll see lots of diagrams with plus and minus. You have a plus for a male and a minus for a female.
Right.
And, in a sense, that's kind of derogatory. It's like, oh, women are negative or something, And I think that's probably what got Lao thinking about it. Why should women be negative, They're equal because, in these twin opposing vortices that give form, this is also another misconception people have often, is that both poles are charging towards each other. Both vortices are going towards each other in the same direction. Often people think, because of the terminology twin opposing vortices, that they're working against each other, and that's not true. They're both spinning in the same exact direction towards the center point, right?
Okay.
But if you were to look down from the top, you would see a clockwise motion from the north, and if you looked up from the south, it would appear to be going counterclockwise. You can see those motions if you use your hand. You do but they're both going in the same exact direction, and that's what gives rotation to galaxies, to the suns, to planets, to moons, all that. Everything is rotating in one direction because both the male and the female are rotating in the same exact direction. It just appears, due to the illusions of our senses, that one is clockwise and the other is counterclockwise.
Was this, and I know this came up, and Matt, I think you and I talked about this in the interview that we did, the idea of the feminine, and it may be since we went there for a minute, there was a balancing act that was going on between the Russells as well. And this, for its time, would have been very sophisticated thought, given that was a period before and leading up to women's suffrage. History had basically relegated women to being a lesser citizen status, but Walter and Lao Russell pretty much worked as complementary parts of a whole, did they not?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, that's one thing that really hasn't been done before that I'm aware of. I mean, Mother Sri Aurobindo and Mother Mira maybe perhaps, but they wrote separate works and never actually authored anything together that I'm aware of. But basically what they did was they conscientiously, with full conscious awareness, decided to work together as one force. And that representative force being the two sides of creation in full agreement and full awareness to pursue this knowledge and write this knowledge down. And I think that's really why Walter wasn't well known until, I mean, he was very well known, don't get me wrong, but his words, and he would often talk over people's heads in his lectures, and people just could not understand him. So when Lao came along, she really brought that grounding feminine balance and helped to complete the message. And like Lao said multiple times, if all you have is the science without the philosophy, then it's like having east without or west without the east. So when you have this science, you must also have the balance of love. Otherwise, you create a science that's destructive. And I think when he gave his book to the world and his discovery of the transuranium elements, without the balanced female, obviously people, nefarious forces took that knowledge and used it to their own detrimental end. So what they did together was demonstrated that, by working together, you could multiply your power by the ratio of the cube, which is 64 times the amount of power. That's what a man and a woman can do together. A man or woman by themselves can only multiply by themselves, which is 8 times. So the greatest potential in your life is 8 times, yourself. But with a balanced mate, when you work together with a mate and you're balanced, you can produce up to 64 times the amount of power together. Because everything is cubical and spherical in this universe, so all power and ratios apply to that cubical and spherical formula.
Yeah, and you talked about the spherical aspect of this, and it's what I said earlier about, we're caught in a square world. A world based on, I guess, the square geometry. But when you look at the galaxies, the solar systems, you see the spirals, you see the spheroids. And it's really an unnatural structure that we live in because of this. I guess what struck me about it was looking at Walter Russell's periodic chart versus the periodic chart that we saw in a high school chemistry class growing up. Can you make a contrast between the two of them, and what happened with the periodic chart? Because that plays in as well to the history of the atomic bomb, I believe.
Well, yeah, to start with the Euclidean stuff you're talking about, we live with all these Euclidean geometries, but those are real. Those Euclidean geometries, they're actually the magnetic geometries of space. They give form to the spiraling spheres and ring systems that we see populating, infinity. So they are very real as well. That's, as we were talking earlier about Frank Chester, that's what he was able to deduce was the chestahedron, which is a space geometry. It's a magnetic space geometry.
Okay, so at this point, can we kind of go into the magnetic aspects of this, or did you want to go back into the electrical side of it, Robert?
Sure. Let's talk about. Well, what I'd really like to, since we were talking about spheres and all this, and it's kind of something that we're dealing with at this very moment is the Thrive movement by Forster Gamble, right? Mm-hmm. And that's taken on a lot of popularity and all of this, and it's concentrated on this torus. Well, that torus is not the way that the universe works. They're promoting this thing as like, these 1%ers are going to teach us about free energy and all this, and they're putting forward this torus, and they're showing how the energy flows, through one pole and out the other, right? And they're saying that the universe generates these toruses, and what they've done is that once again they've removed the creator from creation. That still point that centers the twin opposing vortices, which aren't flowing in one direction, they're both flowing towards each other, has been removed. So, they have some guy like Nassim Harriman that comes on and pretends to be an expert on this stuff, who pretends to also be knowledgeable about Walter Russell and completely misrepresents his work. He comes on and falsely validates this false, this torus idea. And then they put the torus next to an orange or an apple, and they go, look, the whole universe is based on this torus. Yeah, they're playing a shell game with you. Don't buy the Thrive movement. It's total BS. It's owned by the 1%ers. What they're offering is an effect of the twin opposing vortices, right? So that's going nowhere. That torus thing will never. You can make as many torus coils and all this garbage as you want forever, and nothing's ever going to come of it. Another dead end created by the powers that be. The free energy conical coils that Walter Russell built were based on nature, and the nature has two cones, two vortices that meet head on, and that's the very technology that he designed and perfected, and then gave to NORAD, who shelved it and kept it away from, public consciousness. So you have to copy nature. Biomimicry is the way out of this thing. And I'm telling you, Thrive is absolute 100% bullshit,
I've been very skeptical of it from the beginning on a number of levels. You just gave me the scientific levels. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a joke,
But they've infiltrated the movements right now, and this is a problem, and this is why actually this was part of my reason for wanting to have you guys on too, because I'm involved in the alternative energy movement, and I do see a fair amount of distortion even within that right now. And before we go any further into the global conversation about 0 point cold fusion, all the other possible energy solutions that are out there, it seems like we need to get our scientific principles lined up. And it seems to me like it's become very hard for people like me to understand it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a mathematician. But on a gut level, I see obfuscation right now in that particular movement as well.
Absolutely. You know, that's the way the powers that be work, though. They own both sides of every conflict, you know. That's it. And why wouldn't you? You got all the money and unlimited resources imaginable. Why wouldn't you own both sides? And they want us to believe some geek like Farster Gamble, you know. He's like, he wants to come and help us poor little plebeians, you know, have a better life. You know, it's a joke. We've just been, Matt and I have both just posted videos recently that expose all the Illuminati symbolism and the advertisement for it, the poster for it.
Yeah,
you know?
And I saw that as well. Thank you. I'd forgotten about
good.
that. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, good work. In fact, this is what happens to me. I should have blogged that at some point because it was part of a stream of things that I was looking at. But this, you know, my fear is that we're going to lose the momentum of the time right now as a result of what they're doing. And, I mean, I thought from the very beginning that the Occupy movement was somewhat of a sham as well, mainly because you had people who didn't understand core concepts of economics. These were kids that were pissed off. They wanted their college loans paid off, and they somehow felt that they didn't have any participation in the game that they were railing against. And I had a conversation with some of the occupiers where I said, you know, you do understand that you're part of the system, that you grew up in it, and that you have basically invested in it as well. That before you protest it, you need to examine your own stance in regard to it. And most people don't have the ability to be that introspective about their participation.
Yeah, what was that thing about them all parroting like a bunch of lemmings? That was bizarre. I couldn't even stomach that, you know.
Well, yeah.
Yep. One guy would say something, everybody'd repeat it. What's
the reason they were doing that, I'm told, is because they weren't allowed to use bullhorns, so they were using that as a way to echo the information.
Oh,
okay.
It seemed pretty bizarre.
The effect was disturbing. That's the part of it that is, you know, it didn't play well. And people need to understand that this was a media event. If you're going to run a media event, then you have to know how to effectively use media, and Occupy did not have that part of it down well at all. It was a very crude operation.
No doubt. It kind of reminded me of a scene from The Life of Brian where where he would say something and the whole crowd would say something, and I just went, wait a second, you know.
Oh man. Perfect. How did we get that far off of magnetism and electricity? Well,
I don't know, but it's all related.
But what's called but what academicism calls magnetism, there's only one force in the universe, is electricity, right? So they call like a magnet. What a magnet is really, it's a gravity bar, because it's separated by north and south poles. If we call, the Earth has a north and south pole, right?
Right.
So we call the center of that gravity, don't we? And this has got a north and south pole, and we call the center of that, we call this thing a magnet bar. It's really a gravity bar because it's using the same principles, only the difference being that, you know, in the center of the Earth or any spherical or ring system in the universe, it's alive. That's where all the energy's at. That's where an anode point is. In a magnet, if we make a bar magnet, there's a block, what they call a block wall. There's a divider line that separates the north and south anodes, which are male and female. So if we want to copy nature, we have to build our coils like nature does, these conical coils like the entire universe is formed with.
Yeah, and tell them how a magnet is made, Robert.
Yeah, you wrap a wire around, a copper wire around a piece of steel, and you pulse it with electricity. Yeah. And so it's electrical process that creates it, and then they call it magnetism. So
a whole separate force, right? They're completely creating a force, which is created. They're saying it's a completely separate force, but it's made electrically. So why would not it be an electric force? And that's why the terminology is so hard to comprehend, because, until we understand the processes that electricity is used to create the very thing we think is a force, which isn't, it's an extension of electricity itself.
Well, how did the two terms get separated? I understood electromagnetism to be one term. Anybody that's ever done a coil, which is a very simple science experiment, knows that is exactly how you attain magnetism, is by wrapping it in a coil and putting a charge through it. But it seems like they separated the two. Yeah, but it only became a magnet because of electricity. So therefore it is an electromagnet. There really is no other kind of magnet. Is that correct?
Really, actually what it is the gravity bar, as I was saying earlier. Gravity controls the spinning rings, those electrical rings that give the force to the so-called magnet. These are electrical forces, there's only one, in Russellian science, there's one force and only one force, electricity. There's no strong force of the atom, a nuclear atom, because it doesn't exist. There's no weak force. In academic theory, there's four forces. Those don't exist. And magnetism would be considered a force, and gravity also. So they're not. Gravity and magnetism in Russellian science are both stillness. They're the still magnetic light, which is the one immutable, unchanging condition of eternity. All these electrical motions we see are aberrations. They're disturbances in the stillness of magnetic eternity. So that's how we're defining in Russellian science.
Somebody asked in the chat room, and it was where I was going with my thinking, how does magnetism occur in nature like in rocks? What is the source of natural magnetism in the earth?
The same thing. It's all electric, I don't know how it's created. Maybe it's created with lightning strikes to iron ore deposits or whatever. You know what I mean? Everything's got its own way that it's been created. But ultimately, the way anything that's so-called magnetic is created is from electricity.
Is there not a naturally occurring resonance within the earth itself?
The Schumann resonance?
Yeah. Or is that...
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the life force rhythm of the planet itself. It's 7.8 hertz or something, right?
Yeah,
and our brains are tuned to that. Yeah, we're all tuned to that. We, all animals, everything. That's why animals know when to get away from earthquakes and stuff. They're more sensitive than we are.
So, what is the practical application of this in going towards a true Russellian free energy solution? And I know you're not an engineer, and I'm not asking you to do it an exposition from an engineering standpoint, but in your mind, what would be the core concept that would get us to... Is cold fusion a myth?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's totally real. But I think the terminology's, BS, but, because fusion really doesn't exist. They just put that term on it. Right, and
that's where I was going with that, because we're basically the opposite term, or the alternative term to that is LENR, or low energy nuclear reaction, but we're still back into the same atomic mindset.
Right, because there's no such thing as nuclear fusion, and that's all based on the theory that the sun's a nuclear fusion furnace, which it's not, the processes that are going on in the sun are electric as well, because, as we said, there's only one force, it's electricity, so there is no such thing as nuclear fusion as claimed by academia.
So was the initial theory that was put out by Fleischmann and Pons regarding cold fusion flawed in its theoretical base, or did they actually manage to attain cold fusion as a result of the actual principles that were at work?
Absolutely. There's a great Fire into Ice?
Yes.
Ice. Yeah, you've seen it. Eugene Molov.
Yes.
There was a great documentary that showed that, it was replicated all over the planet, but the powers that be that they suppress this stuff, They don't want it getting out there. They don't want us to have free energy. They want us to keep pumping oil and, coal and uranium and stuff,
So how sophisticated is the technology that would be required for us to get to that place? It seems like we have I mean, when we're talking about Fleischmann and Pons, we're talking about tabletop cold fusion. This was not a big scientific array that they use. Now, I think Dr. Rossi's kind of up the ante on that a little bit more, but
sure.
Is there a simple way to get to this? Is there a simple way to replicate the opposing vortices to get to any type of what we would call free or zero-point energy? I know you hate that term.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's simple, but, as Russell said, we use 80 to 90% too much copper in our coils, and we're winding them wrong. We're winding them in, solenoids that are cylinders, and they should be wound in conical coils. So apparently that's what he did. According to the literature, he built some conical coils and was able to produce a free energy device that he gave to NORAD in about 1961 to 3 in that time period, and they just they shelved it, or they're using it themselves in their black ops military operations.
Right. No, and there's a number of people that I've had conversations with about this that know that inside the military industrial complex that they are using this very technology that they're telling us is scientifically impossible.
For sure, because that we stole Schauberger's technology from the Germans when we stole their rocket technology, and so Schauberger had free energy implosion turbines back in the late 30s and early 40s. We stole that technology at the same exact time. We were way behind those guys. They had jet engines, rocket engines, and we used that's the garbage technology we're using now. They hid the good stuff, the flying disc technology, which was based on implosion and free energy technology.
So this technology really is actually what I guess we would call levitation on one level, right?
Absolutely. Because, you think about it, everything, the so-called gravity, it's not an inward pulling force. If anybody's interested in studying gravity, I've just posted a lot of really good videos by W.C. Wright on gravity, where he demonstrates quite clearly the so-called effects are not pulling, but actually repulsion or push, right?
Makes complete sense to me, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, that's... our conceptions of gravity are totally false. But what's really happens when an object, for instance, approaches the Earth, and say it's a dense stone or something, it is highly charged. It's a dense. It's seeking its mutual electrical pressure zone, which it finds in the Earth. So, like when water evaporates, for instance, it becomes very light. It goes up. It seeks its electrical potential in the clouds, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to build a craft that levitates, you have to build a craft that creates a field around it that basically mimics something like hydrogen or oxygen, something that levitates away from the Earth to find its electrical pressure zone, rather than seeking the stillness at the center or the heaviness of the Earth itself, the highly charged electrical matter of Earth and water and what have you. So that would be the way that you do it, and that's what happened with Schauberger's stuff. It would create a levitation through electrical means. Once again, electricity is the only force.
This was actually
changing the electrical potential.
This was actually a discovery that I believe Schauberger made observing forces in nature. Specifically, if I recall this correctly, he was observing fish going up a falls, actually vertically going up a falls, and then discovering that there was actually a field there that they rode as they ascended up the water stream. Is that correct?
Right. And also when they're just sitting in a stream, what's happening is the water's flowing through their mouth. It goes through their gills and they produce vortices, right? Those vortices roll down the trout's body, and that keeps it still. So it doesn't have to sit there and beat its tail against the stream. The stream's coming at it like at 35 miles an hour, but it's sitting there doing nothing to stay in the same spot. But at the same time, it entrains a vortex in front of itself. So what happens is the gills, they become the fulcrum. The gills, so all the fish has to do is slightly move its gills, and it can suck itself upstream at enormous velocity or move backstream, depending on what it does with its gills, which requires no, physical effort by the trout whatsoever. It doesn't have to sit there and beat its muscles.
This is kind of the same concept behind the bumblebee and the way the bumblebee flies as well.
Yeah, physicists never took into consideration that there's a vortex motion of the wings themselves. They have this linear sort of view of these flapping wings,
They decided that it was aerodynamically impossible. Therefore, the bumblebee, for instance, was an anomaly, which is what we call things. Anomalies are great. Fly. Yeah, it's a great word because it just blots out anything that can't be explained by conventional science.
Exactly.
And I remember hearing Ralph Ring explain that concept, and it's so simple.
Yeah, an anomaly is what you end up when you apply a bad theory, basically.
Ain't that true? And they got a lot of bad ones. That's for sure.
I'll tell you, there's more anomalies in science than I care to even wrap my head around. Which and basically what we need to remember is Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is the truest. And this man, Walter Russell, through his divine illumination, gave to mankind the simplest explanation of creation that is in the world today. And I implore people to get out there and research it. But also keep the understanding with you that his earlier works were all amended. Atomic suicide is the New Testament, if you will. And to understand the Bible, you have to read, not just the Old Testament, but the New. So, really, it is the most beautiful story of creation I've ever read. It's the Shakespearean version of science. And it's got imagination, and it's got art, and it's got understanding beyond what most men can even imagine. And no scientist in existence today has come anywhere close to touching this man's incredible imagination. And he gave us the greatest gift we could ever imagine, and that is an understanding of our own creation in which we live. And he gave us the keys of how to master yourself. And that's something nobody's done. Usually they charge you.
Yeah, I did. We lost. Looks like we dropped the call out. Tell you what, let me get reconnected here. The ever-evolving issues with Skype. Oh, God, this stuff just never, ever stops happening. We'll take a break here, play some music. I'll pull Robert and Matt back in, and we'll be right back.
Missed the last couple minutes what you were saying there, Matt. So
okay, yeah, well, maybe we can just reprise that a little bit. Sorry, guys, we dropped out. And
no worries.
So, Matt, can you pick up little bit of the last part of your narrative?
Yeah, what's the last thing you heard?
I can't remember.
Well, I know hell, there it goes.
Let me just say something quick. What Walter Russell did is he brought the dynamics back into science too. This linear, one-way, Big Bang, heat death, time-stop universe that we've got. It's ridiculous. In Russellian science, we have three-dimensional sacred geometry, which accounts for all the spiraling motions in nature and shows the true dynamic processes as they happen. For instance, a sine wave. You see a sine wave on an oscilloscope. That's a two-dimensional representation of a spiraling wave that's repeating itself wave field to wave field. Russell has given us a true understanding of the way nature works, as opposed to basically a childlike, simplified, this time-stop, linear, reductionist view that's taught in academia.
So basically, from the Russellian standpoint, we don't go into a state of death as a universe. I seem to recall him saying at some point, and I didn't completely understand the concept of how the Earth's evolution was linked to our own consciousness, but that at some point, once we attained this consciousness as a race, Earth moved out of its slot and Venus dropped in. Can either of you speak to that?
You want to take that, Matt?
Sure. I mean, it's planets are born from a primary, just like babies are born from a mother. So the smaller baby planets are closer to their mother, the sun, and the older grown-up planets are further out and have children of their own. So, all things move away from their primaries just like children move away from home. I mean, this is natural law. This is what's so inviting about Russellian science, is because it describes the universe as it would describe your own home. And it's understandable in that fashion, and that's what's so natural about it. We can look around our own lives and go, I have a mother and a father, and we can look at an Earth and say the Earth must have a mother and a father too, which is all contained in the sun, which you could say the sun is asexual, and so are all planets. But upon the sun are the division of this, white light into male and female pairs of opposites, which in order to reproduce must come together, literally and physically and spiritually. So, and that perpetuates the drama of creation. I mean, when you breathe in, you create your body. When you breathe out, you destroy your body. Your body appears from the invisibility of rest and disappears from the visibility of motion. I mean, you are perpetually living and dying, growing and decaying, generating and radiating, moving and resting. Your body grows from a multiplication of motion, which charges it with power. It decays from a division of motion, which discharges that power. So it generates and radiates for the same reason that it lives and dies. And the desire in each is equal, and neither can be without the other. So, I mean, each is born from the other simultaneously and then borns the other sequentially. I mean, there's a very real process, and that's basically the principle of the divine Trinity, which underlies, all that is expressed and is possible through this two-way interchange of motion between each pair of opposites through each other. So that's how atoms are as well. Everything moves in and through each other. It's all one, and that is the truest, way to look at your universe, is to simplify it. All this complexity is caused by gazing at motion and trying to figure it out. And you eventually end up with your jaw dropped and drool slacking out of your jaw. But when you use your mind to see the universe, it becomes one thing. And that oneness is in and through everything. And that's how we are to understand our universe. Not by dividing it into a trillion puzzle pieces and then trying to put it back together, but by uniting all the trillion pieces into one and saying that each piece does the same thing as every other piece. And so then you can begin to truly understand your universe from this sense.
Right. And the question you had about man is, eventually this planet will reach a point where mankind won't live here anymore. The idea of man will no longer manifest on this planet, but the idea of man is eternal. So mankind will manifest all over the universe, The universe is infinite, and we are eternal. So there's no reason to fear death, because there's no such thing as death. There's just an end of a mortal existence, and a refolding back to the still magnetic light, and then another incarnation. So nobody needs to fear death, ever.
And you basically pick up where you left off in the preceding life. You don't lose all that you've gained in those lifetimes. So that's why some people come back and they have amazing abilities, because they remember,
Have you, in the work that you've done, encountered people who are working in science and physics, and are you getting pushback from them over these concepts? I know.
My dad was a nuclear physicist. He ran the nuke program for Sandia Laboratories, so believe me, I've been around it my whole life.
It doesn't get any deeper than that, does it?
That's right.
Yeah, wow. But according to most skeptics out there, they believe Robert and I have never read a science book. But,
well, that's
when you live in the house of a nuclear physicist who runs, the lab for the nuke program, I mean, you're bound to grow up around, right? I mean,
absolutely.
These people have no idea. They're jarheads. I mean, they'll spew anything that trolls out there. It's unbelievable. But yeah, Robert's got an absolute, extremely superior understanding of material science. I have a minor one, but he knows it in and out. He can tell you pretty much about anything that science has put forth. But what scientists can't tell you that he can is how to debunk the very things they put forth. And that's why I partnered up with him, because he's got that understanding. So
yeah, because they're not critical thinkers; they're memorizers. They've taken all this information and memorized by rote things that are absurd. I mean, when my chem professors in 1976 told me the nuclear atom was a fraud, and they're going, "Look, check all this, all this algebra out that we have to, calculate Avogadro's number and all this other garbage," I realized at that point there was no sense at all in sticking around for this crap, because they had no relationship to reality whatsoever. And that's why we have toxic chemistry. That's why we have toxic technologies, is because our science is all screwed up.
Yeah, they're basically reciting the catechism of established science, in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
To me, it's like a religion. They are
absolutely. They're not critical thinkers, and they lack intelligence, or they would have jumped ship when they were being taught this bullshit.
Exactly. And there's one thing that believing this tripe does. It keeps the pockets of the energy barons lined with green money.
No doubt.
There's your reason for it. Okay? And until people can lose these quackademic, nonsensical, anti-natural, basic, destructive philosophies, we are in a dire situation.
We're living in a hellhole.
That was Robert and mine's motivation for teaching this and extending this to other people, and that's why we don't charge money. I mean, that's why we're doing it for free. This is a labor of love. We're trying to save the planet in a sense that we're just trying to get people to think outside of the box, to see nature and see how nature works, and reflect those motions. And when we can use biomimicry and mimic nature's motions, then we will create clean, free engines. Nature does not set things on fire to do her work. She generates coolness as she lifts her forests into the air, and we must do the same. When we mimic nature through biomimicry and biomechanical engineering, mimicking the vortices in nature, then we will achieve that which we seek. The culmination and ability to express energy in a way that nature does, which is in balance with the rest of nature. So there's no explosion, there's no pollution.
And gives us unlimited abundance, everyone,
Exactly. And we can be done with these wars and begin to manifest a true brotherhood and sisterhood on this planet, which is the other half of the science, is the philosophy. You have to have love and science together, otherwise you'll just create destruction.
Well said, brother.
You have this conference coming up in September, and I'm happy to see it's in Virginia. It's close enough that I am really going to try and be there for this. You have a number of other speakers speaking there. Can you tell us a little bit about who's going to be appearing?
Sure. David William Gibbons, extremely super bright person. Him and Alan Lee Atkins have done an amazing breakdown of the Universal One, being true to the Universal One, breaking it down in those terms as well. Even though there were amendments and they do understand that, they still stay true to that book and define it and such. And it's an incredible, I've listened to 19 parts, and there's 24 parts, each about an hour and so many minutes long. But just an incredible forte, the way they have stayed true and have the integrity to respect the message as it is without trying to change it for their own a lot of people in this study of Russell, and we've had to express some distaste for certain people out there who are basically like Nassim Harriman. He called himself a bridge between physics, the dysfunctional physics that we're remonstrating against, that Walter remonstrated against. He calls himself a bridge between that and the Russellian science, which is there is no bridge between something that's dysfunctional and something that's functional in accord with nature.
I think it's called a cliff.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, this bridge is made of air, and I wouldn't recommend crossing it. But what David and Alan have done have stayed true to the message. They're both going to speak. We have Jim and Jacqueline Porter, who are an incredible inspiration to Robert and I, in the sense that if it wasn't for her nudging me on Facebook when I was a member for 2 months, that short-lived experience back in 08 or 09, then I'd have never gone to Virginia and met them and furthered this work. So we have also the president of the University of Science and Philosophy, Michael Hudak, who's going to open the conference. We're hoping to get Dr. Tim Binder involved, and we're also hoping to get a few others involved. We have several people coming. Dagmar Neubrunner will be presenting from Germany. She runs the website walter-russell.org, and you can visit David Gibbons, GIBBONS.org. Jim and Jacqueline Porter, I don't have an address for, but you can reach them at characterclubs@gmail.com, I believe it is. If not, email me. You can go to the secretoflight.com and sign up on the contact page and ask for further questions. We do have a conference page on the Secret of Light that is being updated perpetually. So as we get more information and the flyer gets amended, things will go. Richard Dulaney and Jeffrey Bullington are the two other committee people that I work with on the planning of the conference. They're extremely great gentlemen. Hopefully we could have J.B. Yount speak. He wrote the book Remembered for Love, all about Leo. So, I mean, it's a very great coming together from the heart. The theme of the conference is called The Power of Love in Action. The Cosmology of Walter and Lao Russell. So it's a real great opportunity, and we're all going to come together at Swannanoa at the former University of Science and Philosophy, and bring the loving, kind-hearted goodness of people who truly want to see change for better in this world happen at the edge of their fingertips. They're involved. These people are living the message of love, not just preaching it. So it's a great chance to get together with former students and bring so many like minds of Russell students and studiers and really leading people in the movement for natural science and living philosophy and universal law together under one tent. And I'm proud to be a part of it.
I would like to have both of you come back sometime before the conference again and update us on that. I really want to see the work that you're doing be entered into the conversation right now, because I think you have the ability, and you've certainly amassed enough material that you can affect what is going on in the alternative energy stream right now. I look at it from a distance. I see some exciting things, but I also see how it could be destabilized destabilized, but with things like Thrive and some of the more parochial science that's out there right now. So that's a standing invitation from me to you, Robert and Matt, to use this and let's push this a little harder, because this is an important time for planet Earth to really start to get this right.
Sure, it's been a great pleasure, and we'd be happy to come back anytime.
It's been a pleasure for me to have you,
Randy.
on tonight.
You're a kindred spirit, my friend, and you resonate in the same fields as true men and women do. So it's an honor to join you on your show this evening. Thank you so much.
Well,
much
thank
love.
You. Much love to both of you, and we will do this again very soon. Thanks for the time spent and for the joy and for the knowledge you've imparted. That's going to wrap it up for this week. I didn't even look at my schedule to see who's here next week, but it's on the website and y'all can read. So I'm going to bag it and go to bed and get rid of this flu-like symptom thing. This is All Planet Radio. I'm Randy Moggins. The truth is out there. It's inside of you. Begin to really tap into it. See you next week, folks.